Abraham nearly sacrifices his son Isaac. Jacob steals his brother's inheritance by tricking their father. These are the founders of Judaism. They weren't saints or superheroes. They were messy humans in a messy family. Across 3 generations, the Torah follows Abraham, his son Isaac, and his son Jacob as they navigate family drama, moral dilemmas, and some truly unforgettable encounters with God. This isn't a story about moral perfection. It's about what happens when loyalties collide, when sibling rivalries get out of control, when doing what you think is right requires you to sacrifice something you love. It's about impossible choices that still feel uncomfortably close to home thousands of years later. This is the story of the patriarchs, how a complicated family became the foundation of Judaism. Before there was even a name for the Jewish people, there was Abraham. He's the kind of guy who listens. He listens to God, he listens to his wife, he takes commitment seriously. And again, that loyalty puts him in situations where there's no clean outcome, where doing the faithful thing still means someone gets hurt. Before he was Abraham, he started out as Abram, living with his family in ancient Mesopotamia, a place where the people believed in lots of different gods and practiced pagan traditions. But then, God speaks to him. God says, "Leave your father's house and go to a land that I will show you." There's no map, no destination, just a promise that Abraham will become the father of a great nation and a blessing to the world. In a world of polytheism, God is offering Abraham something radically new, a long-term exclusive relationship, one God, one loyalty. It's the theological equivalent of putting a ring on it. And Abraham says yes. He and his wife Sarai walk away from everything familiar and step into the unknown. Jewish tradition points to this moment as the birth of monotheism. Abraham wasn't choosing one God over others, he refused to conform to the entire idol-worshipping world around him, and placed his faith instead in the idea that his God was the one true God. But almost immediately, his faith in God's promise is tested. God promises Abraham many descendants, but Sarai struggles with infertility, unable to get pregnant. God's promise hangs in the air unfulfilled as they get older and older, making the idea of having children seem more and more far-fetched. Eventually, Sarai comes up with a plan B. She tells Abraham to sleep with her servant, Hagar, so he can have an heir. He goes along with it, and Hagar becomes pregnant. But then things get complicated. Hagar is stuck in an ambiguous role, now a wife to Abraham, but still a servant to Sarai. And the Torah says that in Hagar's eyes, Sarai was lowered in her esteem. Sarai feels threatened, worried that Hagar's status in the household will be elevated over her, and she complains to Abraham. Abraham shows complete loyalty to his wife Sarai. He tells her that Hagar is just her maidservant, and that Sarai can treat her however she wants.
My wife is still my wife, and you are still her servant. You must obey her.
And with his green light, Sarai treats Hagar poorly. The Torah doesn't tell us exactly how Sarai mistreats Hagar, but it's bad enough that Hagar runs away. Some rabbinic sources give Sarai the benefit of the doubt, interpreting the story to suggest that Hagar was the one acting insulting to Sarai, boasting about getting pregnant when Sarai was barren, and that Sarai didn't actually treat Hagar cruelly. She simply treated her as she always had, as her servant, which Hagar took as persecution because of her newly inflated self-image. On the other hand, it still feels like an ugly look for both Abraham and Sarai. He seems to neglect the well-being of the woman carrying his child, who is now his wife, and he and Sarai both treat a vulnerable member of their household with cold disregard. But the Torah's narrative doesn't abandon Hagar. God appears to her and tells her to go back. He promises her that her son will survive, and that he too will become the father of a great nation. So she returns and gives birth to a son, Ishmael. Years later, Abraham and Sarai have long since given up on a child of their own when 3 angels arrive and announce that Sarai will finally give birth to a son. She laughs, since by now she's so old that it seems biologically impossible. But then she gets pregnant and gives birth to Isaac. This is when God gives the happy couple new names, Abram, which means exalted father, becomes Abraham, which means father of multitudes. And Sarai, which means my princess, becomes Sarah, which is princess without the possessive. In other words, Sarah is no longer just a princess within her household, but the matriarch of a larger nation. The new names are a sign of God's covenant with Abraham, to make him the father of many nations. But God asks for another, less pleasant sign of the covenant that must be repeated in every generation: circumcision. Abraham agrees to circumcise himself, his son Ishmael, and all his male servants. And starting with Isaac, every new baby boy in every generation must be circumcised 8 days after they're born. The birth of Isaac reignites the tension of the household. Ishmael is now 13, and Sarah sees him as a threat to Isaac's future authority. She demands that Abraham kick out Hagar and Ishmael. This time, Abraham is devastated. He may not feel any attachment to Hagar, but Ishmael is his son. He doesn't want to cast him out. Still, God tells him, "Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her voice." God also reassures Abraham that Ishmael will survive, so Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael out into the wilderness. The story here is messy. It doesn't wrap up with a neat bow. Abraham remains loyal to his wife and to God, but that loyalty comes at a severe cost to Hagar and Ishmael. Now, even though Abraham's loyalty to Sarah is unshakable, their relationship still has its own complications. On 2 separate occasions as they travel through foreign lands, he tells local rulers that she's his sister, not his wife. He does this because he's terrified that if people know she's married, they might kill him in order to take her. So instead of telling the truth, Abraham puts Sarah in danger, and she goes along with it. It's a choice they make together to survive. And it works. Abraham is spared. But Sarah is taken into the households of powerful men. Imagine how vulnerable she felt, her safety, her freedom, suddenly in the hands of strangers. Each time, the only thing that ultimately protects her is the fact that God intervenes on her behalf. Abraham's decision feels reckless. Even the great Jewish scholar Ramban says that Abraham sinned here, and that he never should have put Sarah in danger this way, even out of fear for his own life. It shows that Abraham may be loyal, but he's not always courageous. And, as we saw with his treatment of Hagar, loyalty doesn't always lead to moral perfection, but nothing compares to the moral dilemma faced by Abraham in the next story. Isaac is the child Abraham waited decades for, the miracle baby, the proof that God's promise was real. But then, God tells Abraham to take Isaac to the top of a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. No explanation, just a command. Abraham doesn't argue. He brings Isaac up the mountain, builds an altar, binds his son, raises the knife. And, at the very last moment, an angel of God stops him. Isaac is spared. It was a test. When competing loyalties pulled him in opposite directions, Abraham chose God. But the Torah doesn't tell us what Isaac felt, and it doesn't tell us what Abraham carried inside after that day. Abraham isn't a hero because he's always right. He's a patriarch because he makes difficult decisions in impossible moral situations. And that struggle will continue in the next generations. Unlike Abraham, Isaac never leaves home. He doesn't blaze a new trail or build something from scratch. He lives inside the world his parents created and avoids conflict. Honestly, the Torah spends a lot less time talking about Isaac, and a surprisingly large portion of his story is about digging wells. When Isaac digs wells near his land, local shepherds move in and claim them for themselves. Now, he could fight back, but instead, Isaac walks away and moves on to dig other wells. On the surface, it can look weak or cowardly, but maybe what Isaac is really doing is choosing peace over dominance. Perhaps he's refusing to let conflict define him. That's a different kind of strength than Abraham's. It's quieter, more patient. Isaac's quiet strength shapes his home as much as his land. He marries Rebekah, and they have twin sons. Esau is born first. He grows up to be a hunter, rugged, impulsive, at home in the wild. Jacob, meanwhile, grows up more inward and thoughtful. As the Torah puts it, he was a wholesome man abiding in tents. And apparently Jacob was also much less hairy than his older brother, but more on that later. Over time, the family begins to split. Isaac favors Esau. and Rebekah favors Jacob. If you haven't noticed, favorite children is a recurring theme in the patriarch story, and that favoritism will shape everything that comes next. One day, Esau comes in from the fields exhausted and starving. He asks Jacob to share in some of his lentil stew, and Jacob offers to sell the stew in exchange for Esau's birthright as the oldest son. Now, in the ancient world, the birthright is everything: status, inheritance, authority. All the more so in this family, where the birthright includes a special covenant with God. But Esau is hungry and perhaps a little short-sighted, so he agrees to trade his birthright for a hot meal. This would come back to haunt him. Years later, Isaac is old and his eyesight is failing. Now, poor vision is something that often happens with old age, but one famous rabbinic interpretation finds some more meaning in this detail. It says that Isaac's eyes were damaged when he lay bound on the altar about to be sacrificed by Abraham, because the angels wept over him, and their tears fell into Isaac's eyes. In other words, the biggest event of Isaac's life isn't something he did, it's something that was done to him. And even decades later, at the end of his life, his body still carries that trauma. Note to self, don't let angel tears get into your eyes. So Isaac is old and blind, and he senses that he's nearing the end of his life. He asks Esau to go out and hunt some game and prepare a meal, after which he'll give Esau the great patriarchal blessing before he dies. Rebekah overhears, and she knows what this blessing means, so she tells Jacob, her favorite son, to deceive his father. She prepares a meal for Isaac herself and covers Jacob's arms with goatskin so they'll feel hairy like Esau. Jacob hesitates. He knows it's wrong. He knows he could be cursed instead of blessed if he's caught, but he obeys his mother. He goes to his blind father pretending to be his brother. At first, Isaac is confused. The voice sounds like Jacob, but the hands feel like Esau. But Isaac goes with it. He grants Jacob the blessing of abundance, power, and leadership over his brother. Moments later, Esau arrives and the truth comes out. But Isaac doesn't take the blessing back. Instead, he gives Esau a different blessing, that he will be sustained by the fatness of the earth and the dew of the heavens, but that he would still be subordinate to his younger brother. Esau is furious. He vows that once their father dies, he'll kill Jacob. When Rebekah finds out about this, she comes up with a plan to protect Jacob. She convinces Isaac to send Jacob to stay with her brother Laban, so he could find a suitable wife. She figures Jacob could lay low at Laban's until Esau calms down. So Jacob sets off on a journey, and one night, he has a dream that will change his life. In the dream, Jacob sees a ladder stretching from the ground all the way up to the heavens. Angels are moving up and down the ladder, and God appears and repeats the same promise he made to Abraham and Isaac, that Jacob's descendants will become a great people, that the land will be theirs, and that God will protect Jacob wherever he goes. It's an important moment. Jacob still has some growing and changing to do, but now he knows that the blessings he stole from his brother was real. When Jacob finally gets to Uncle Laban's house, he meets Laban's daughter Rachel and falls in love. So in love that he agrees to work for Laban for 7 years to earn her hand in marriage. 7 years of labor. And because he loves her, the years fly by. But after the wedding feast, Laban pulls a trick of his own. He swaps in Leah instead of Rachel. So Jacob accidentally marries the wrong sister. The deceiver has been deceived. Jacob confronts Laban, who explains that in his community, the older daughter must be married first. Laban allows Jacob to marry Rachel too, but only if he agrees to then work another 7 years. Jacob agrees. The man who once wore goatskin to trick his father is fooled into a marriage that he never chose, forced to have a second wife he doesn't love. And his family becomes just as fractured as the one he left behind. 2 wives leads to rivalry, jealousy, children born into competition. Perhaps this is the cost of Jacob's ambition. The world he once manipulated now manipulates him back. For the first time, Jacob has to live inside the consequences of his own methods, learning firsthand the cost of deception. Jacob eventually leaves Laban's household with wealth, wives, children, and herds of his own. But he's still running from the same thing, his brother. He hears that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob panics. He divides his family into groups just in case some are attacked and others can escape. He sends gifts ahead, hoping to soften Esau's anger. He prepares for the worst. That night, Jacob is alone when a mysterious figure appears. It could be a man or an angel, maybe even God himself. They wrestle together through the night. Jacob is injured, but he refuses to go down. He says, "I will not release you until you bless me." This time, he doesn't steal the blessing. He earns it. The mysterious figure gives Jacob a new name, Israel, which means one who struggles with God. It's not a reward for being righteous. It's recognition of what he's become, a man who no longer hides, who confronts his fears. The next day, Jacob finally meets Esau. He doesn't know what to expect, but he's prepared for the worst. But then, instead of violence, Esau embraces him. Jacob bows and speaks with humility. With time, it seems, both men have changed. It's not a perfect ending. Esau doesn't get his blessing back. Jacob isn't suddenly innocent, but they choose to move forward instead of looking back. Jacob begins his life taking what he wants through deception, manipulation, and running from the consequences. But over time, he grows. His life is about earning an identity rather than inheriting one. He's renamed Israel not because he's perfect, but because he struggles, survives, and keeps going. Jacob's story doesn't end with him. His 12 sons will go on to become the 12 tribes of Israel, and the family never becomes perfect. The rivalries don't disappear. The favoritism doesn't vanish. Brothers still turn on brothers, but his descendants keep the covenant with God alive, giving birth to a nation of people guided by values that help navigate a messy world. Judaism doesn't pretend its founders were flawless. The Torah shows them making difficult choices and living with the consequences. Over the centuries, Jewish tradition turned struggle itself into a Jewish value, building a culture of questioning and debate. In that sense, the story of the patriarchs isn't just about where Judaism came from. It's a framework for thinking about what it means to try to do the right thing in a complicated world. And that's a human struggle that never really ends.